Hello there, I'm Karim Zachary and you're watching All 24 News, World News program broadcasting to you live from the capital Algiers. Up next are the headlines. Algerian National Assembly debates a draft law criminalizing French colonialism. The Mend in Paris acknowledges past crimes before offering compensation. And up next, Reef communities stage massive march in Amsterdam, reaffirming their commitment to full independence. The Reef National Party denounces repression and exposes a sham reconciliation policy. Also in our news, 3 soldiers have been killed in attacks in northern Syria as clashes continue between the Syrian army and SDF forces. And later on, European leaders prepare for an extraordinary summit over Greenland this Thursday to address Trump's threats. The EU is readying its largest countermeasure package yet. The details are right up. Welcome back. It's great to have you with us tonight. First up in our news, the Algerian National Assembly, or the Upper House of Parliament, continues debating a draft law criminalizing French colonialism. The law, made up of 5 chapters and 27 articles, is based on international legal principles affirming the right of peoples to justice and ensuring colonial crimes do not go unpunished. It lists the crimes committed during French colonial rule, holds France accountable for its past, and sets out mechanisms for official recognition and apology. It also introduces penalties for glorifying or promoting colonialism. The National Defense Committee of Algeria's parliament has raised several reservations about the draft law criminalizing French colonialism, particularly including regarding compensation and official apologies. In its report during the debate, the committee said the text does not fully align with President Abdelmadjid Tebboun's national approach, which focuses on securing acknowledgement of colonial crimes rather than monetary compensations nor apologies. The committee recommended revising certain provisions, calling for adjustments and improvements to better reflect the law's objectives. Algeria's Minister of War Veterans or Mujahideen and Rights, Abdelmalek Tashrif, stressed that the core of the draft law criminalizing French colonialism lies in recognizing the historical rights of the Algerian people and addressing the moral damage caused, affecting identity, dignity, and collective memory.
لقد كان الاستعمار إنجاز تعبيره.
Colonialism, if the term may be used, was just in its distribution of misery and the perpetration of crimes among Algerians without discrimination, including exile, forced displacement, systematic killing and torture, land confiscation, and attempts to erase the features of national identity and heritage. It continuously employed all legal, administrative, and military means to legitimize occupation over the course of a century and a third. The heinous colonial crimes suffered by Algeria do not expire with time according to all international principles and charters. They cannot be swept under the rug or forgotten. Rather, they must be addressed through recognition of these crimes. There can be no human justice without acknowledgement and no dignified future without redress.
The Algerian Minister of War Veterans or Mujahideen and Rights emphasized that the draft law criminalizing French colonialism underlines that victorious Algeria would never compromise its national memory, accept attacks on historical truth, or relinquish them under any circumstances.
The proposed law criminalizes French colonization of Algeria embodies a clear and explicit condemnation of a colonial regime fundamentally based on oppression, injustice, and systematic denial of human rights. At the same time, it affirms that victorious Algeria never compromises on its national memory, nor accepts any infringement upon or concession of the truths of its history under any circumstances or pretext.
For his part, Faisal Bousdraya, reporter of Algeria's National Defense Committee, said the draft law criminalizing French colonialism is a decisive step in strengthening historical justice. He added that the legislation helps preserve the dignity of the country's martyrs and ensure that future generations know the national history accurately and truthfully.
Recognition in this context is neither symbolic nor rhetorical. It is an act of historic responsibility that acknowledges the crimes, names them for what they are, and condemns colonial system built on killing, extermination, forced displacement, and systematic plunder. From this perspective, the law criminalizing French colonialism in Algeria enshrines this sovereign stance within a binding legal framework, elevating the demand for recognition from a political position to a legal obligation, and affirming Algeria's firm adherence to its sovereign choices.
In the same context, French historian Benjamin Stora described Algeria's draft law criminalizing French colonialism as a sovereign decision aimed at putting an end to attempts to deny historical facts. In an interview with our channel, Stora called for a comprehensive approach to resolving memory-related issues between Algeria and France.
This decision was taken as a sovereign act by Algeria, a fully sovereign state. On its part, France has also voted on laws, some of which were considered positive signals toward improving bilateral relations, while others were challenged. What does this mean? It means that states do in fact determine how historical events are characterized and condemn any attempt at historical denial, that is, the denial of historical facts. However, at the same time, the mere adoption of a law is not sufficient, as I previously noted, to definitively resolve issues of prejudice, racism and negative sentiments. Voting on a law may be an important condition, but in my view the work of historians must continue. Legislative law should not be used to say stop here to historical inquiry. It must not hinder historical research. On the contrary, it should serve as an opportunity to open new horizons for historical studies.
French historian Benjamin Stora also warned that the rise of the far right in France poses a real threat and could put past historical work at risk. He expressed concern that a new political leadership in France might review or undo measures taken toward historical reconciliation between Algeria and France.
The rise of the right wing in France, which has become very powerful in French society today, could jeopardize everything that has been achieved. This is precisely the problem, just as happened with the measures taken regarding October 17th and what was accomplished there. What worries me is that all these measures could be reviewed by the new political authority that may emerge in France. The rise of the extreme right, as we see in opinion polls, represents a real threat. They hold a vision of history based on grand colonial values and are currently in positions of power in a number of regions and municipalities. They aim to change the names of heroes and rename them according to their own criteria for what they consider heroic.
And in another national development, Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune received Saudi Interior Minister Prince Abdulaziz bin Saud on Monday. According to a statement from the Algerian presidency, the president held an extended meeting with the minister and his accompanying delegation. The session was also attended by Boualem, the principal private secretary to the presidency, and Algeria's Interior Minister Said Sayoud. In another story, Algeria's Chief of Staff, Army General Said Chengriha, attended the opening ceremony of the 9th Doha International Maritime Defense Exhibition and Conference, DIMDAX 2026, during the second day of his visit to Qatar. According to the Algerian Defense Ministry, Army General Chengriha and his delegation toured several exhibition halls after the opening ceremony, closely inspecting the advanced weapons and military systems on display. During his visit, Army General Said Chengriha met Qatar's Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister Sheikh Saud bin Abdurrahman Al Thani and Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Jassim Al Manai. They reviewed bilateral military cooperation, praised the strong progress in Algerian-Qatari defense ties, and discussed ways to further strengthen this partnership under the guidance of both countries' leadership. Moving on to a different story now, the Reef National Party held a vigil on Sunday evening in Amsterdam, commemorating the mass killings carried out by the Makhzen regime against the Reef people, known as Black January, in 1984. Protesters raised slogans denouncing the ongoing systematic repression faced by the Reef community at the hands of the state security forces.
We are commemorating the 42nd anniversary of the January crimes of 1984, when the Moroccan regime turned the Reef into a scene of mass crime and a mass grave, marked by killings and gunfire, kidnappings, martyrs who disappeared after abduction, torture, unjust sentences, exile and mass graves. When we mention 1984, we recall that the palace and the royal family have a history stained with blood, as we know that many martyrs fell that year. People were buried alive in the streets. This was a genocide. It should be emphasized that the palace and the Moroccan monarchy do not have a good history, but rather a bloody history, and we stress this point.
In the same context, the Reef National Party reiterated its rejection of reconciliation with the Makhzen regime ahead of the possible ascension of Hassan III in Morocco. Speaking at a protest in Amsterdam, party member Mohamed Douihri said the movement remains committed to continuing its sovereignty struggle until the last Moroccan soldier leaves Reef territory and the Republic regains full control over its lands.
We are here to commemorate the 42nd anniversary of Hassan's II massacre against the Riffian people during the years of lead, in which hundreds of Riffians were killed. The Riffian people have a strong memory. We will not reconcile. We will not be bitten from the same hole again. We will continue our sovereign struggle under the evacuation of the last Moroccan soldier from our land.
Moving on to the occupied Palestinian territories now. 2 Palestinians were killed by Zionist forces on Monday in Khan Yunis and the neighboring area of Rafah in southern Gaza amid the ongoing violations of the ceasefire. The Palestinian Media Center reported that occupation forces carried out a series of intense airstrikes targeting eastern Deir el-Bala and central Gaza, alongside gunfire in the southeast of Khan Yunis, and demolished residential buildings east of Khan Yunis in the southern part of the besieged Gaza Strip. Two years of Zionist attacks in Gaza continue to take a heavy toll. While more than 71,000 people have been reported killed, the number of those still trapped under the rubble remains unknown. Families, despite limited resources, continue their desperate efforts to recover the bodies of their loved ones and give them at least a dignified burial. More with Zahra Farjani now.
With sieve and shovel in hand. At first glance, it may seem they are searching for gold or hidden treasures. But this is Gaza, and here beneath the rubble, thousands of bodies have been buried for months. With only rudimentary tools, Abu Ismail hopes to recover the bodies or what remains of his late wife and children killed in a Zionist airstrike on December 6, 2023. One thought consumes him: to bury them with dignity.
On December 6, 2023, our home was targeted by a Zionist bombardment. My wife and my children were killed, along with my brother and his small family. I was also injured, and my recovery took many months. Since then, I've been trying to find the bodies of my wife and children, but the means are very limited. I managed to retrieve the bodies of my brother, his wife, and their children.
Abu Ismail's story is not an exception. Thousands of similar cases exist across the enclave. Hamouda Salim is living the same nightmare. Since January 23, 2024, he's been hoping to recover the bodies of 11 members of his family, still buried beneath the rubble of their building, bombed in Khan Yunis. Day after day, without rest, he returns to the ruins of what was once his home, now transformed into a family grave.
My relatives are trapped under the house. No one can rescue them. I come here every day hoping to save someone, but it feels hopeless. We try again and again, praying that God will help me recover some of them so they can be buried. I don't know how to describe what I feel when my entire family is buried under the rubble of our home and I'm unable to bring them out.
Despite the so-called ceasefire that the United States and the Zionist entity want the world to believe in, Gaza behind closed walls is dying and continues to endure the horrors of a Zionist genocide. Still under blockade and siege, the enclave and its people are being consumed. If the missing have fallen as martyrs, the survivors are left as bodies without souls in a city reduced to total devastation.
Meanwhile, Israeli occupation forces launched a wide-scale arrest and raid campaign on Monday across several cities and towns in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian news agency reported that 24 Palestinians, including 3 children, were detained during the operations, which targeted the governorates of Nablus, Beit Lahem, Al-Khalil, Tulkarm, and Jenin. For his part, the Palestinian National Initiative Secretary General Mustafa Barghouti revealed an agreement to form a 15-member committee to manage Gaza in coordination with all Palestinian factions. In an interview with our channel, Barghouti emphasized that Gaza's administration must remain fully under Palestinian internal control, reiterating his rejection of any foreign management of the territory.
توافقنا على لجنة فلسطينية.
We agreed on a Palestinian committee of 15 people to take charge of matters in Gaza, and we were in Cairo 3 days ago and reached an agreement on this with the Palestinian factions. The problem is that the one obstructing this, including the start of the committee's work, is still Netanyahu, who is trying to prevent entering the second phase. This confirms that the issue of Gaza's administration must remain in Palestinian hands, and the relationship with the International Council should be a coordinated one. We will not accept being managed by foreign parties.
Similarly, the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative praised Algeria and their President Abdelmajid Tebboune for its efforts to unite Palestinian factions and expressed appreciation for Algeria's full support of the Palestinian cause and the legitimate rights of its people.
With the personal participation of His Excellency President Tebboune, he provided us with all the necessary support to make that meeting successful, and the meeting was indeed successful. Unfortunately, its decisions were not implemented, but we will not stop continuing our effort. We are working from Algeria to ensure that the role it plays, a distinguished role, continues, and that the Algerian people, who are exceptional in their unwavering support for Palestine, continue to strengthen that support even more.
Elsewhere in the Middle East, and as you followed in our headlines, the Syrian Army Operations Command reported on Monday that 3 soldiers were killed and others injured in 2 attacks targeting Syrian forces in northern Syria. In statements carried by the state news agency SANA, the army accused so-called terrorist groups linked to the Kurdistan Workers' Party of trying to disrupt the ceasefire by attacking Syrian Arab army positions in the north. Clashes broke out between the Syrian army and the so-called SDF near Beir el-Ama and Tishreen Dam in eastern Aleppo and around Al-Qutn prison in Raqqa, which holds so-called ISIS detainees. The Syrian army urged the SDF to respect the ceasefire and avoid targeting military units. According to the Army's Operations Command, Syrian forces have fully secured Tishreen Dam, northern Raqqa, and western Haska, and continue to control key strategic sites, including Tabqa military airport, oil and gas fields, dams, and border crossings following the SDF withdrawal. On Monday, the Yemeni government accused the United Arab Emirates of running secret prisons in eastern Hadramaut province. Salim Al-Khan Bashi, a member of Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council and governor of Hadramaut, warned in a televised address that measures will be taken against the UAE and the Southern Transitional Council, alongside steps to ensure justice for the victims of the secret prisons.
Over the recent short period, the governorate has suffered from incursions carried out by armed groups loyal to Aidarus Zubaydi and backed by the United Arab Emirates, which spread fear among peaceful and unsuspecting residents. Today we present to you part of what we have found in terms of suspicious and troubling Emirati traces, preparations and practices that are inconsistent with the officially declared actions of the coalition and its stated support for legitimacy in Yemen. I assure you that justice will take its course and that the law will be applied. We will provide the victims and their families with legal, medical and psychological support. All necessary measures will be taken to hold accountable those responsible for these violations, whether Aidarus Zubaydi or the United Arab Emirates, as well as any of their element officials or collaborators whose involvement in these violations is proven.
And on another front, the United Nations has warned that cuts in funding could worsen Yemen's humanitarian crisis, raising concerns over severe malnutrition. On Monday, Julian Harnais, UN Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator in Yemen, said around 21 million people in the country will need aid this year. He added that in 2025, only $680 million was provided to UN operations in Yemen, just 28% of the funding target.
The simple narrative is children are dying and it's going to get worse. And my fear is that we won't hear about it until the mortality and the morbidity significantly increases in this next year. It's terrible for them. Some families haven't seen their loved ones in 5 years. They don't know the conditions of the detention. They don't know where they are. They don't know if they're going to be sentenced to death in the coming days.
And in another topical development, European leaders will hold an extraordinary summit on Thursday to discuss repeated threats from US President Donald Trump regarding Greenland and related trade tariffs. A spokesperson for the European Council, which includes the heads of state and government of the 27 EU member countries, said on Monday that the summit focuses on transatlantic relations.
EU leaders are consulting intensively. As well as that, engagement with the US is continuing at all levels. Our priority is to engage, not escalate. Now let me emphasise that intensive consultations are ongoing among EU leaders. President Costa has indicated the likelihood of an extraordinary European Council this week to tackle this very subject.
For its part, the European Commission on Monday called for dialogue instead of escalation in response to repeated threats from US President Donald Trump over Greenland and related trade tariffs. Spokesperson Olav Giel stressed that the European Union has the tools to address the situation and is prepared to respond if the US president carries out these trade threats.
The EU has consistently underlined its shared transatlantic interest in peace and security in the Arctic, including through NATO. In response to your questions, Jorge, should the threatened tariffs be imposed, the European Union has tools at its disposal and is prepared to respond, because we will do everything necessary to protect EU economic interests.
More on the American desire to seize Greenland and the threat of tariffs which have destabilized Europe with Kerry Musfawi.
The Greenland crisis is entering a tense and delicate phase since Donald Trump revived his idea of buying the Arctic island or else imposing tariffs. Europe has been grappling with uncertainty, but now the continent decided to hit back on its turn, threatening to impose tariffs on Washington.
Europe will give a united, clear response, and we are now preparing united countermeasures with our European partners. We're preparing them in case President Trump maintains his tariff threats.
For its part, Sweden has described the measure as absurd, urging EU member states to adapt and show economic resilience.
The idea that a US president would use tariffs as a threat to try to buy or take over Greenland is simply absurd. Absurd in a way we haven't seen before. The most important thing is that we act together, as many of us as possible, ideally all 27 EU member states. We cannot respond by standing there with our heads bowed.
Meanwhile, beyond Ireland, nations like Germany and the UK are warning that a tariff war would hurt everyone. They are instead calling for dialogue.
Tariffs benefit no one and harm almost everyone. We do not want a trade dispute with the United States of America. I will try to meet with President Trump again on Wednesday. We simply want to try to solve this problem together. The US government knows that we could also respond from our side. I do not want that, but if necessary, we will of course protect our European interests.
The use of tariffs against allies is completely wrong. It is not the right way to resolve differences within an alliance. Nor is it helpful to frame efforts to strengthen Greenland's security as a justification for economic pressure.
Trump's interest in the island is not new. During his first term, he had already floated the idea of buying Greenland. His proposal was rejected by the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen. With Greenland at the center of the dispute and the new tariffs now, leaders are racing to respond, but one wrong step could trigger a full-blown trade confrontation.
The Russian presidency has expressed deep concern over what it called worrying developments regarding Greenland as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to push for its inclusion in the United States. On Monday, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Moscow is closely monitoring the situation and noted that some experts believe Trump's move to annex Greenland could go down in history.
Perhaps it is possible to abstract from whether it is good or bad and whether it is in alliance with international law or not. But there are international experts who think that by solving the issue of Greenland's takeover, Trump of course will go down in history, both the history of the United States and the world history.
Moving on now to the latest developments on the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his negotiating team is working on peace documents with representatives of U.S. President Donald Trump. Speaking on Sunday, Zelensky expressed hope that a security guarantees agreement with Washington could be signed on the sidelines of the Davos Forum in Switzerland. He added that talks with the U.S. team are ongoing and will continue next week as preparations for ending the war move forward.
There were reports today from our delegation in the United States. Rostom Imorov briefed on meetings with representatives of President Donald Trump. Several rounds of negotiations have already taken place and work is underway on the documents needed to end the war. It is important that the Ukrainian team fully informs the American side about what is happening in Ukraine and about Russia's constant strikes on our energy systems.
Moving on to another development, but this time in Africa. On Monday, the Sudanese army launched intense airstrikes on rapid support forces positions in North and South Kordofan states. Local media, citing military sources, reported that the raids destroyed combat vehicles west of Bara in North Kordofan. At the same time, the army targeted a joint force of the rapid support forces and the popular movement in the Farshaya area north of Delange, killing several field commanders and destroying military equipment. Meanwhile, Sudan's war is driving the largest displacement crisis in the world, with millions forced to flee their homes. Across the region, health emergencies and humanitarian needs are mounting amid the ongoing violence. Here's Marwa Bilaiwar with the report.
For nearly 3 years, Sudan has been engulfed in a devastating war that has forced hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee in search of safety. Across the border in Chad, nearly 1 million Sudanese refugees are registered, with a total likely surpassing 1 million. Despite the massive displacement, conditions for those seeking refuge remain dire. The United Nations describes this as the world's largest displacement crisis, with more than 14 million people displaced inside Sudan and across neighboring countries,
This conflict in Sudan is truly tragic, heart-wrenching. It has been going on for far too long, over 1,000 days so far. It has caused immense suffering, abuse, murder, and displacement of millions of people. Talk to women who have been abused, raped, people whose parents have been killed, children have disappeared. It is just a calamity.
Humanitarian organizations say funding is falling far short of needs, leaving millions without access to food, clean water, medical care, and shelter. Yet back in Khartoum, the capital, life seems to resume as markets reopen cautiously.
There are obstacles all along the way, from farms and shops to the arrival of goods here at the market. We suffer from a lack of resources, staff shortages, and a deficit of cash and funding. The market is not what it used to be, but overall is doing better compared to the time of the rapid support forces.
The crisis in Sudan is indeed multifaceted. In fact, health authorities warn of a deepening regional health crisis as collapsed infrastructure and conflict have sparked outbreaks of cholera, measles, and malaria. Meanwhile, unpredictable weather, including rains and windstorms, have worsened the situation for displaced families living in fragile camps and tents. Between the refugee camps and the battered streets of Khartoum, a shared longing persists, an end to a conflict that has torn apart lives and shattered communities.
And finally, it's time to catch up on other news stories making headlines in the News in Brief with Yassine Rikti this time.
A Russian drone attack hit Ukraine's Odessa region Sunday, damaging energy and gas infrastructure, apartments and vehicles, and injuring one person. Officials said Russia's defense ministry later claimed its forces captured towns in Donetsk and Zaporizhia and destroyed bombs and missiles while downing 122 Ukrainian drones during ongoing intense fighting. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takahashi announced the dissolution of parliament and called for early elections on February 8th. Speaking at a press conference on Monday, she said the move aims to secure public support for new spending plans and a revised security strategy to accelerate the development of Japan's defense capabilities. French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu announced he would invoke Article 49.3 of the Constitution to pass France's stalled budget amid an unprecedented political deadlock. Speaking Monday, he said the government would assume responsibility to secure approval of the revenue section, projecting a deficit of 5% of GDP, implying Socialist Party support to avoid a no-confidence vote. The death toll from the collision of two high-speed trains in southern Spain rose to at least 40. The Interior Minister said Monday, up from an earlier count of 24. The crash in the Andalusia region injured about 123 people who were taken to hospitals in Córdoba and Andújar. Emergency army units deployed to assist rescue teams, setting up a field hospital near the site. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez pledged full transparency in investigating the causes and declared 3 days of national mourning.
And with this, our news program comes to a close for tonight. To catch up on anything you missed or get the latest updates, you can always head over to our social media channels or our website. From all of us here at All 24 News, I'm Karim Fazakri. Thanks for watching and do take care.